This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Tension, fear as African governments step up coronavirus fight. We look at how governments are rolling out drastic measures as the continent begins to come to terms with life amid COVID-19 pandemic. China strengthens screening for imported coronavirus cases. We check out what the capital city is doing. This is CGTN. Welcome to Africa Live with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program. In business news, Nigerian inflation rises for the sixth straight month to a new two-year high. And in sports, the Professional Squash Association calls off 33 tournaments due to the coronavirus outbreak. And we continue this hour with our COVID-19 coverage. In Africa, 32 countries have reported over 560 cases of the COVID-19. Let's now take a look at the numbers across the regions. Northern Africa has the highest number of cases, with the majority in Egypt. 30 new cases were reported in the country on Tuesday. A 78-year-old Italian woman and a 70-year-old Egyptian man both died in an isolation hospital. Morocco announced 6 new cases, all of which came from abroad. In Western Africa, confirmed infections have also gone up slightly. Burkina Faso has recorded 5 new cases. The government has closed schools and universities and banned public gatherings. Meanwhile, the Gambia has just confirmed its index case. In Eastern Africa, Tanzania has reported 2 new cases of the virus, one detected in Dar es Salaam and the other in Zanzibar. Both are said to be foreign nationals. Rwanda has the highest number of cases in the region. The nation closed schools and places of worship soon after its index case was reported. Djibouti has also confirmed its first case in the country. Central Africa maintains the lowest total number of infections, with only 18 recorded so far. But in Cameroon, the number of cases doubled to 10 earlier this week. Meanwhile, the Health Ministry in South Africa has just confirmed 31 more cases of the coronavirus. Overall, there have been 13 deaths across Africa, and the World Health Organization is reporting 47 recoveries on the continent. For the latest on coronavirus in Africa, I'm now joined by Adnan Chauchi in Tunis, Angelo Coppola in South Africa, Phili Haza in Abuja, and Coletta Wanjohi in Ethiopia. Now let's start off with you, Adnan, because Tunisia has imposed 12-hour daily curfews to counter the coronavirus. What is the situation now in Tunisia, and how are other governments in the region dealing with the pandemic?
Yes, Beatrice, as you have said, the president imposed a curfew. He addressed the nation last night, but it's certain that this new curfew will improve the security situation, but the president's decision was criticized on social media and social networks, and also in the private and public media for its inefficiency in improving the sanitary situation nationwide. As people gather during the day from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., you can see people in public transport, people heading to work, people at malls. The reaction of the people was expected, actually. It was expected because people are rushing to malls, to shopping centers to get the basics, to get mainly food and medicine. What is certain today is that this will have a direct impact on the economy, as restaurants, cafes, malls, and different businesses are losing money. Who's going to pay? This is the question that's been asked to the president and also to the government. Who's going to pay for the millions lost by businesses, by medium-sized enterprises here in Tunisia? As far as the situation in the region is concerned, what is common between Tunisia and Egypt is the competence of the medical staff. Egypt is well known, as just like Tunisia, that it has very competent medical staff to face the COVID-19 outbreak, but the situation is still under control in the two countries, and we hope that the governments in the two countries will take more strict measures in the next few days. For Libya, the situation is stable in Libya. Stable because the government of National Accord ordered a total lockdown. The lockdown blocked the country, blocked transport, blocked aviation, blocked businesses, but at the same time, the situation is stable and no more cases of COVID-19 have been reported. Some Libyans chose to go home and to leave to their country from the two main border crossings with Tunisia, while other Libyans chose to stay here in Tunisia, where they believe that the sanitary and the healthcare system is more efficient. I interviewed for CGTN some Libyan nationals who said they prefer to stay here in Tunisia. But many civil society associations, NGOs, as well as politicians, Libyan politicians have called for on all warring parties, on all political parties, on all tribal leaders in Libya to stop the ongoing war in Libya, because COVID-19 plus the war, this is too much for the Libyan people. And actually, this is according to many Libyan civil society activists. The situation is still under control in Tunisia, in Libya. It is still under control in Egypt, and we hope that more measures will be taken by our government here in Tunisia to improve the sanitary situation, and also to provide food and medicine to the people, and also to provide more treatment. We are expecting some help and some support from the Chinese government, and actually the parliament speaker here in Tunisia and the president of the republic expressed their gratitude to the Chinese authorities for their support to Tunisia, and called on other friendly countries to support the North African state and other North African states and African states in general in their fight against COVID-19.
Right. Let me go to Angelo, though, because Angelo, South Africa has recorded 23 new cases of coronavirus in one day, the highest increase of any 24-hour period since the country confirmed its first case. What more can you tell us?
Well, look, at midnight, we heard that 85 positive cases had been announced. There were 8 internal transmission cases also overnight. And then 2 hours ago, that's around 9 o'clock South African time, that number jumped to 116 with another 6 local transmission cases. And authorities now are scrambling to try and track and trace and attempt to identify how those local transmissions are actually happening. Meanwhile, the Moria religious event organizers have cancelled their event in the April holidays over Easter. That normally sees around 1 million people congregating near Polokwane to celebrate Easter. SAFA, the South African Football Association, says they're planning to carry on with league games under very strict conditions. We don't know what those are. Cricket and rugby, the other 2 major sports in the country, have postponed their events for now. Regionally, Namibia announced a state of emergency, and Botswana has banned all flights from high-risk countries and also going out to in that direction. They've also banned all government travel. In South Africa, parties have also thrown their weight behind government efforts. Leaders met earlier this morning with Cyril Ramaphosa. They put aside their political differences to fight this crisis together. Meanwhile, South Africa's governing ANC has postponed all of its upcoming conferences as the country deals with the COVID-19 pandemic. Other political parties in the country, like the EFF and the Democratic Alliance, have also rescheduled their major events. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa addressed the media as ANC president less than 24 hours after he declared a national state of disaster.
The ANC did need to embrace what government has announced, and the ANC expressed itself in full support of the measures that government announced, and wants to actively participate in ensuring that the measures that were announced yesterday are implemented.
Ramaphosa announced that all upcoming ANC conferences are cancelled until further notice.
The ANC itself has some tasks, and some of its tasks are to curtail its own activities, particularly in relation to the large meetings that were being planned and that are part and parcel of the process of the work that we do in the African National Congress.
Ramaphosa also announced that the governing party would conduct door-to-door visits in communities to educate people about the COVID-19 virus. The governing party took a moment to commend China for the way that country has dealt with the outbreak of the coronavirus. Secretary General Ace Magashule says China has the capacity to assist South Africa deal with this virus.
We have been working very close with China. It's part of BRICS. It's part of a country which has supported us during apartheid. It continues to support us. Our relationship is a very strong relationship, party to party, government to government. And they are indeed friends in need. They've always been there. And we are still working together. We are going to make sure that we have agreed that China has the necessary capacity where they are supposed to work with us, we'll appreciate.
A number of political parties have also cancelled their upcoming conferences. Yuli Sanjamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Ready? Now, looking elsewhere on the continent, Phil, Nigeria has confirmed its third case a few days ago. What's the latest in Nigeria and West Africa, and how is your government dealing with the situation?
Well, thank you. In the region, West African region, a couple of countries are definitely trying their best to contain the coronavirus disease. We have countries like Gambia, who just announced its index case, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Liberia, Senegal, Cameroon. But, some of the stringent measures are coming from Ghana, and Liberia, who have announced travel bans on several countries that have at least 200 cases or more. But that's for non-citizens coming into the country. They're definitely doing their best to contain it. Liberia, for example, is applying lessons that it learned from tackling the deadly Ebola virus in 2014 and 15 by placing hand washing services at several parts of the country, bus stations, government offices, hospitals, restaurants, public places where there are possible crowd or gatherings of people. But in Nigeria is Africa's most populous country, and of course the most populous in the West African region. The government has given periodic updates, press briefings to the country on step-by-step approach on how it's tackling the disease. But currently, as we speak, the latest is the fact that the federal government has placed a travel ban on 13 countries, including the United States, UK, China, Italy, Norway, Germany, Spain, and a host of others, because there's been pressure on the government before now to place restrictions on certain countries who have been tackling or trying to contain the Ebola, the coronavirus, especially countries that have high, margin of the disease, and therefore that's the latest in the country. But before now, we've had the government also ban, or rather postpone, the National Sports Festival that would have seen thousands of sporting, sport athletes from different parts of the country, the 36 states and federal capital, meet in Edo State, South Nigeria for that activity. We've also seen the government postpone the National Youth Service Corps orientation scheme, which would have seen millions of young graduates, gather at several camps across the country. So the government has been, the only concern for many has been the fact that the borders have been left open, no travel restrictions, that people might come into the country undetected, especially if they do not show signs at the testing point at the airports. But the government has just placed a ban, and we're hoping that further updates from the Health Ministry will be given for, but for now, Nigeria just has, as reported, 3 cases of the coronavirus disease. 2 of them, one of them have tested negative. Then the index patient is recovering according to the health ministry. And then the latest case, which was reported just a day ago from UK, a Nigerian who came in from the UK, tested positive, but she's in self-isolation at the moment, as well as her family members. So that's the latest in Nigeria and, of course, the West African region. Back to you, Beatrice.
All right, Philly Haza in Nigeria, Adnan Chauchi in Tunisia, and Angela Coppola joining us there from South Africa with the very latest on what the regions are doing to fight COVID-19. Well, let's now bring in Coletta Wanjohi, who is joining us from Addis Ababa. Coletta, how is the Africa CDC dealing with the spread of COVID-19 across the continent?
Well, Beatrice, the Africa CDC began dealing with COVID-19 right before even the first case was reported in Africa, and it started alerting the member states on the need to update their surveillance systems as well as prevention systems. And now that we have about 30 countries with the positive cases of COVID-19, the CDC has continued with the daily liaison with member states, public health institutes from different countries in terms of assisting them whenever they need. And with an emergency team based at the African Union headquarters, they are able to send in technical teams and medical professionals to member states that require or demand for any. And also the Africa CDC has a stockpile of diagnostics kits that it is sending out to countries on demand. So the Africa CDC is ensuring that it continues to train African member states on the need to step up surveillance, on the need to keep giving preventive measures to their citizens. And as part of this, it has just removed a kind of a statement or kind of a document that guides communities around the continent on social distancing. So regular communication with member states is what the Africa CDC is doing, as well as assisting technically.
Coletta, we do know that there has been quite a lot of collaboration between China and the Africa CDC and African countries. How is the Africa CDC collaborating with China to help stop the spread of the virus? And what is the Africa CDC saying in terms of recoveries from the African continent?
Well, right from the time when China was hit by COVID-19, the Africa CDC reached out to China and continued talking with the China CDC to understand how the China CDC was tackling COVID-19 the other side, so as to learn and get some lessons that it would apply to Africa. And now that it has come to the continent, there is continuous communication. And as we are speaking right today, there was a teleconference between the Africa CDC, 24 African member states who was seated here at the African Union headquarters with the China CDC. And the different countries were asking the China CDC different issues on how they managed to cope up with and combat COVID-19 so that they can be able to implement that in their countries. And that continues, and the Africa CDC says it hopes that going forward it will get more expertise and more assistance from China in terms of information as well as technical know-how on how they can continue combating quickly the issue of COVID-19 in the continent. And in terms of recovery of cases, we have about, as of today, we have about 40 recovery cases in the continent. Good news for the continent, and the Africa CDC says this is because of, this shows that African countries have stepped up their surveillance and more needs to be done. And it also shows that people are testing, diagnostic kits are happening, and more of this needs to be done. With about 42 countries that can now do laboratory diagnosis, that it hopes that in the future, early testing will lead to more recovery.
All right, Coletta Wanjohi joining us there with the very latest on the Africa CDC's efforts to fight COVID-19. She's joining us there from Addis Ababa. Thank you. Well, we earlier spoke to Dr. Mary Stephen, the Technical Officer of the World Health Organization Regional Office for Africa, on how the organization is helping the continent to deal with the pandemic.
Okay, so from the beginning, we knew that the continent of Africa is at risk of importation of the coronavirus from China and, of course, other affected areas. And that's exactly what we are seeing. But before we move from readiness to response mode, we started helping countries to enhance what we call their readiness capacity, for them to detect early, isolate, and respond to the potential cases of importation of coronavirus. So following the declaration of outbreak in Algeria, which is the first country in the WHO regional office for Africa to report importation of coronavirus, we moved from readiness to full response. And of course, we saw a number of countries reporting cases. As of today, we have 25 countries under the WHO Regional Office for Africa that have confirmed cases of COVID-19. So we are supporting countries across all the response pillars. So following the readiness assessment, we established where the countries were in terms of their readiness to respond, and we started providing them targeted support in areas where they had weaknesses. So we looked at areas from multi-sectoral coordination, case management, infection prevention and control coordination, laboratory support, interventions at the point of entry, and also logistics. And we are supporting countries in all these areas so that they can quickly address the gap. And currently, we are enhancing and providing more support to countries that have confirmed cases right now.
Somalia is calling for concerted efforts in containing the spread of coronavirus, a day after it recorded its first COVID-19 case. The Horn of Africa nation has joined several African countries who also have recorded similar cases. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo with this update now from Mogadishu.
A 2-week suspension on all international flights and a ban on passengers from COVID-19 hotspots are some of the recent measures imposed by the Somali government after the country recorded its first positive case of coronavirus. In an address to the nation, President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo has appealed for concerted effort in containing the spread of the virus with neighboring countries that are already dealing with several positive cases of COVID-19.
We pray for the immediate and full recovery of our citizen who tested positive for the coronavirus. Our neighbors Kenya and Ethiopia have also recorded similar cases. We should now embark on efforts to contain the spread of the virus because we have seen many developed nations unable to cope with the scale and magnitude of this virus.
A major campaign is underway on local televisions and social media, educating the community on ways to prevent the spread of the virus. A preparedness task force comprising of medical doctors has also been formed, ready to assist the government tackle a possible outbreak of COVID-19 in the country.
The public needs awareness on COVID-19. We need to tell the public that coronavirus is a disease with all the symptoms of the normal flu or cold. Therefore, the public need to keep healthy lifestyles, maintain regular hygiene, and wash their hands with soap and clean water for at least 20 seconds. Social distancing and ensuring you cover your mouth and nose when sneezing, and use of masks to cover the face.
Hospitals across the country have been urged to conduct tests on all suspected cases, but with a weak health system, it's unlikely that the exercise will prove successful. COVID-19 has officially been declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization, and authorities here in Somalia say they are not taking any chances and are now mobilizing the international community for urgent funds to help mitigate any potential outbreak of the disease. Abdulaziz Bilon, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
The Libyan Prime Minister Fayez Sarraj has declared a state of emergency over the global coronavirus pandemic. The Prime Minister on Monday ordered the closure of all air and land ports for 3 weeks as a preventive measure. CGTN's Adnan Chauchi reports.
Tunisian and Libyan authorities have closed the Wezn Dhiba and Bengirdan border crossings over coronavirus concerns. Members of the crisis unit in the Tunisian governorate of Tataouine said that health measures have been reinforced at the borders.
Prevention is our first strategy in order to guarantee the safety of all people before they cross the border in any direction. The government employees, customs agents and security forces, as well as Tunisian and Libyan travelers, were sensitized.
Faiza Sarraj said that schools and universities would be closed for 2 weeks. Thousands of Libyans seized the last opportunity to return home before the border closure.
The coronavirus has spread to the world. It does not stop at the border. The Libyan government wants to prevent a catastrophe. All the measures taken by the government in Tripoli aim to counter the virus.
Some Libyan families chose to stay in Tunisia while the healthcare system is more efficient.
The coronavirus terrifies many people, especially the elderly. I opted to stay in Tunisia because I can take my parents to the clinic in case of an emergency.
Tunisian and Libyan authorities have banned public meetings and closed mosques, as well as shisha bars, over coronavirus. Libyan state workers were advised to take their annual leave. Meanwhile, foreign nationals were banned from entering the North African state to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
There are still no recorded cases of COVID-19 in Zimbabwe, but the government has now declared the rapidly spreading virus a national disaster. Here's CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya in Harare.
Despite years of inadequate funding and a series of doctor strikes, a stroke of good fortune has allowed Zimbabwe to identify the coronavirus.
We are lucky in that, we already had the relevant equipment, the testing equipment, which we call the testing platforms for any other type of viruses. And that platform can also be used for the testing of coronavirus, the COVID-19 specifically. So it is the polymerase chain reaction platform. And that is the definitive testing scheme, for any of the viruses and for coronavirus.
There have been several suspected cases that have been quarantined and tested negative at an infectious diseases clinic in Harare that's been converted into an isolation and treatment center. But its 35-bed capacity can be quickly overrun should a full-scale outbreak occur in Zimbabwe. The center doesn't have enough equipment, including protective gloves and masks. On Tuesday, the government declared the coronavirus a national disaster and cancelled national independence celebrations due in April and banned public gatherings of more than 100.
With immediate effect and for a unified and coordinated effort, I have directed that our national disaster management machinery extend its mandate and focus to dealing with the pandemic.
His government set aside an additional $177 million to prepare the country to fight the disease and to cushion those in society who may be affected. Apart from its own resources, the country is relying on partners like China to assist.
In Zimbabwe, we have not had a case of coronavirus 19, COVID-19. Therefore, we cannot talk about any experience in as far as treatment is concerned. But we are gathering information from China on what that they've used, which has been successful in treatment.
Health officials say while they'll continue hoping the zero-case record remains intact, the thinking here has changed from if to when there is a confirmed COVID-19 case. Alert levels have been heightened after more cases were recorded in neighboring South Africa, the country's biggest trade partner and home to many Zimbabweans who've left the country but who frequently return home to visit. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
We are receiving news from Kenya that the Kenyan Health Cabinet Secretary Mutahi Kagwe has confirmed 3 more patients tested positive for the virus, meaning the country now has 7 patients with COVID-19. The world has seen a rapid rise in COVID-19 cases. Data from the Johns Hopkins University shows nearly 200,000 people have been infected worldwide. Outside China, there are over 110,000 cases spread over 150 countries. Italy has the largest outbreak in Europe, confirming over 3,500 new cases on Tuesday. Spain is Europe's second most affected country, reporting over 11,000 infections. Iran, the worst hit country in the Middle East, has seen the virus spread to all of its 31 provinces with over 16,000 infections. New infections in South Korea continue to slow to double digits for the fourth day as of Wednesday. On the Chinese mainland, 23 out of its 24 new cases are international arrivals. Only one new infection has been reported in Wuhan. Chinese officials report 0 local suspected cases, while 85% of patients in China have recovered. The Chinese capital, Beijing, is imposing a 14-day quarantine on all travelers arriving from overseas as the country shifts its focus to limiting imported coronavirus cases. Authorities in Beijing say travelers who refuse to quarantine themselves or follow official rules will be punished. Yu Yang looks at the specific measures.
Beijing is taking the lead with the measures to curb the highly infectious disease from spreading back into the country. Many travelers will have to put off the joy of homecoming until after 14-day quarantine.
In general, the incubation period for novel coronavirus is 14 days. After 14 days of quarantine, symptoms can be detected and treated. For individuals, this is the safest and most active way to protect their health. In this way, people can also protect their family members' health to the maximum.
But the measures vary according to individuals' health status. Travelers from outside Beijing without abnormal symptoms will be taken to their hometowns. Those living in Beijing will need to be quarantined for 14 days in designated hotels at their own expense. Passengers showing virus-related symptoms are immediately being taken to hospital.
The Xiaotangshan Hospital has been open since March 16th, mainly to screen suspected cases and to treat patients with mild or less severe symptoms who've come back to Beijing from overseas.
Meanwhile, the city has cordoned off a whole wing of Terminal 3 at its massive capital international airport, using the area to screen and register all international arrivals. Authorities say the airport is facing headwinds like never before, because all international flights, including planes from Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan, are landing at that special region. Passengers arriving with large quantities of luggage are also impacting the efficiency of on-site transfer. One airport official said incidents such as 5 travelers recently arriving with 121 pieces of baggage between them are making things even more difficult.
We have already set up routing systems for the passengers and those who need to be quarantined to strengthen the on-site order. We are also cooperating with the Beijing Transportation Department to deploy more than 10 trucks to help transport luggage.
All the measures have been taken at the airport, checkpoints and the hospitals to reduce the risks of spreading the coronavirus. However, if an individual refuses to be quarantined or follow official rules, he or she will be punished. For example, one Australian Chinese living in Beijing was reported to not follow the rules for self-quarantine after returning to the city. The woman later was fired by her employer Bayer China. The company says it asks all its staff to follow local government measures and regulations to fight the coronavirus. Yu Yang, CGTN.
Italian authorities are reporting another steep rise in deaths. The country's civil protection agency says 345 people have died in the past 24 hours due to COVID-19, and authorities have also reported the highest increase in new cases, almost 3,000 in the past outbreak, had to say.
6 intensive therapy beds were created.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Nigerian inflation rises for the 6th straight month to a new year, 2-year high. And the United States steps up measures to support American families amid the coronavirus pandemic. Annual inflation in Nigeria rose for the sixth straight month to a near two-year high as the impact of the country's closed borders continues to be felt. Inflation stood at 12.20% in February compared to 12.13% in the previous month. It is the highest inflation rate since April of 2018 when it stood at 12.48%. A separate food price index showed inflation at 14.90 in February compared with 14.85% in January. This was caused by increases in prices of foodstuff. Nigeria closed parts of its borders in August to fight smuggling of rice and other goods, but economists say that has in turn driven inflation as local food producers now struggle to meet demand for food in a country of around 200 million people. In the meantime, U.S. President Donald Trump is drawing up a massive emergency spending package to contain the growing economic impact of COVID-19 pandemic. On Tuesday, the president called for bipartisan support to rush immediate cash payments to American families. The overall price tag of the package could be anywhere from $850 billion to more than $1 trillion. The effort is among the largest federal emergency plans ever and far surpasses the assistance provided during the 2008 global financial meltdown. Trump wants the checks sent to the public within 2 weeks. He has also urged Congress to pass the stimulus in a matter of days as analysts warn the world's biggest economy is on the brink of a recession.
We're looking at sending checks to Americans immediately. And what we've heard from hardworking Americans, many companies have now shut down, whether it's bars or restaurants. Americans need cash now. Was because the technology was disrupted. I've been on the phone with the major banks, with the New York Stock Exchange. Everybody wants to keep it open.
Passengers a day. But there are now travel restrictions affecting nearly every continent. Analysts estimate that could lead to more than $113 billion in lost revenue for airlines, which ripples down to other companies in the supply chain.
You know, in the best of times, the airline industry is a very low margin business with a lot of costs that have to be borne. And if you start seeing revenue drops by 60, 70, even 85% in some cases, then the cash hemorrhage becomes unbelievable. So basically, the entire industry is very much at risk.
The aviation sector is now taking action to try to get ahead of losses. In the US, American Airlines is reducing international capacity by 75% until May 6th. United Airlines says it's had 1 million fewer customers than usual for March compared to last year. The airline is looking at job cuts and expects the situation to get worse. The group Airlines for America, which represents a number of US carriers, says they're seeking more than $50 billion of assistance. If granted, this would be the first bailout for the industry since the September 11th attacks in 2001. But even after the virus is brought under control, the effects for all travel could be long-term.
Consumers will take their time in terms of coming back to those cruise lines, casinos, etc. And we might even see a shift in personal spending habits if they conclude, you know what, I saved an awful lot of money by not traveling and probably wouldn't hurt my personal balance sheet to save a little bit longer.
Here in the US, the government says it's discussing various options to support the travel industry, while France, Germany, the Netherlands and the UK are also considering action. But the Centre for Aviation is warning that without coordinated global efforts, most airlines in the world will be bankrupt by the end of May. Sarah Walton, CGTN, New York.
Meanwhile, leaders in the European Union have agreed to close the bloc's external borders to most non-European Union citizens for 30 days to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Europe has been called the new epicenter of the global outbreak by the World Health Organization, with many countries in the continent already on lockdown. CGTN's Tony Waterman has the details.
Allowed in one day, banned the next. Foreigners looking to enter the European Union will find that nearly impossible to do in the coming days.
The Union and its member states will do whatever it takes to address the current challenges, to restore confidence and to support a rapid recovery for the sake of our citizens.
EU leaders agreed to seal their external borders for 30 days as they try to slow the spread of the deadly coronavirus. Confirmed cases have already surpassed 70,000, with no let-up in sight.
The enemy is a virus
And now we have to do our utmost to protect our people and to protect our economies.
European citizens, residents and their families, along with medical staff and diplomats, are exempt from the ban, which could be extended if the situation deteriorates further. The EU-wide measure comes after a number of member states put strict restrictions in place, both for foreigners and fellow EU citizens. It's caused gridlock at the borders. Truck drivers were stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic at Germany's border with Poland on Tuesday, after Warsaw enacted health checks, one person at a time. It was a similar scene at the France-Switzerland border, ensnaring at least one nurse for hours as she tried to make her way to work.
These are still human beings. They're in their beds, they're waiting for blood tests, they're waiting for their blood pressure tests, they're waiting for us to feed them, and here we go, we're stuck.
Brussels is hoping so-called green lanes for lorries will keep goods seamlessly flowing across the single market, even as borders get squeezed tight.
It's now up to EU leaders to implement this ban, and they've been encouraged to do that immediately. It's an extraordinary move for the bloc, which cherishes the freedom of movement both in Europe and outside. For Brussels, the move pulls every country back into alignment at a time when unity is key, even if that unity is fragile. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Tunisia's tourism industry had only just recovered from militant attacks in 2015. It was gearing up for a record tourist season that many had hoped would make up for the less than stellar performance of other parts of the economy. The COVID-19 pandemic, however, has other ideas. It's now left the North African state's tourism sector with minimal traffic, a steep fall in income, and with jobs at risk.
Tunisia's tourism sector finally recovered from years of pain caused by militant attacks in 2015. Amar Joani has been optimistic about this year. His souvenir business might also be looking up. But with the coronavirus devastating holiday bookings, the survival of his business is at risk.
I think of closing the shop. I'm thinking of looking for another job to earn my living.
Tunisia has confirmed 13 cases of coronavirus, mostly people who have recently arrived from abroad. And the government has called for the closure of schools early for their scheduled spring holiday and stopped some international travel.
There is no tourism, there is nothing. This disease has been a disaster for the people. People can no longer afford food, people are in need and do not know what to do. They don't know where they're heading. If I'm making $3.50 a day and I'm supposed to feed my family and children, I cannot do this.
Tunisia has been gearing up for a season of record visit numbers that politicians hoped would make up for the gloom elsewhere in the economy. But with a drop in the forecast economic growth to 1% from 2.7%, citing the virus as the reason, the expected economic growth will be further strained.
I must say there is stagnation. Many reservations were cancelled, especially reservations made by large groups coming for conferences or big gatherings. Look at what's happening today in Italy and France because of this disease. All these countries are affected, which affects our tourism.
Tourism accounts for nearly a tenth of Tunisia's economy and is the second biggest employer after agriculture and provides an important source of foreign currency. The crash that followed the 2015 attacks caused the gross domestic product growth to slow to 0.5% that year from an expected 3%. It contributed to a sharp fall in the value of Tunisia's currency. The North African nation had agreed to a loan program in 2016 with the International Monetary Fund, but it expires in April, and the new government agreed in February after months of wrangling that it is now trying to negotiate a replacement. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. African artists exhibit their work at the Stellenbosch Triennial. Stellenbosch Triennial Flagship Exhibition brings together an array of artists from a number of African countries. The list of the exhibitors reads like a who's who of contemporary art from the continent. The showcase presents contemporary art from the African continent in a critical dialogue with the society that fosters and exhibits it. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
This exhibition represents a body of inspiring talent, with artists whose work can now be found in museums around the world. The works are also curated into biennales and are housed in important private collections around the world.
Because it was important for us to celebrate contemporary artists from the continent, to bring some of Africa's finest contemporary art on the continent, because sometimes, you know, when you want to actually experience African art or art from the continent, you have to travel to New York, to London. And we thought, why not? Why not have it in South Africa? Why not in Cape Town? Why not in Stellenbosch?
The discourse between the artists is proving to be quite critical.
Not only like as them personally, but through their work, their aesthetic, their concepts, and see how artists are in dialogue with each other, that artists actually don't create in silos. There are always conversations happening at all times. If we look at Mahama's work over there, that looks more at, you know, the economy of death, labor, you know, and, you know, speaking from an architectural perspective and looking at the body as a formal body and also bodies as an informal bodies. What do we do with that economy of death and economy of labor?
The exhibition reflects artists who are considered unique from our African continent.
So there's different things that we're touching on. Some of the work is political, some of the work is like play and political, some of the work is more about being sensing yourself, sensory work, and some of the work is more about aligning yourself.
These artists from Ghana took the exhibition's theme, "Tomorrow There Will Be More of Us," and translated it into what he calls conscious optimism.
There is a certain optimism that I read in the theme, and I figured it is something that we would have to almost complicate a little in dealing with optimism, looking at what's happening across the globe today.
The exhibition is on until the end of April. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Cape Town, South Africa.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. The Professional Squash Association calls off 33 tournaments due to the coronavirus outbreak.